This is Gemara Metziah, Daf Sadi, and we're holding at the very bottom of Peites Amid Beis, and probably while you're listening to this, Torah Anytime is wrapping up their campaign. A tremendous thank you to all those that contributed and everyone else. There's always time to give tzedakah b'siyata d'ishmaya. So holding the last line of Peites Amid Beis, Tanu Rabbanan, as the Gemara continues the Isser of Chasima, which is muzzling an animal, etc. Says the Gemara, apologies, we a little camera situation. There we go. Tana Rabbanan parois hamerchasais bitvua. Cows that are merchasais, they're busy trampling grain. And Rashi over here, on the last Rashi, speaks out that the shvarim that we're discussing are not the classical threshing, but rather they're threshing to remove. Let's just read Rashi together; it's easier. They soak the barley in water, and then what do? They dry it out, betanur in the oven. And they thresh it with cows. And they remove the outer husks. That's what we're middle of discussing. So paras and merchasais, cows that are trampling onto the grain, as we turn over to Sadi Aleph, Badashais Bitruma, or the animals that are threshing Truma or Maiser, or Maiser, Einoi Oiver Misham Bal Tachsai. In these scenarios, there is no Isser of Bal Tachsai, of muzzling the animal. Generally, the animal is not allowed to be muzzled while it is threshing. But over here, this is, as we mentioned, the latter stage. That's why the process is so critically important, that we're discussing a latter stage, and therefore there's no problem of muzzling the animal. However, there's a different problem, which often is the issue when you're doing something very similar to Nisr. Says the Gemara, there's a problem of Marasayin. Continues the Braisa, maybe bull me'asamin. He brings a bowl, a fistful of the same type of item that the animal is in the middle of stepping on, processing. And hangs it in the feed bag. The animal's working, and there's the feed bag in front of it. So you hang that same food that the animal is trampling on. You give the animal to eat. It says that's the Tanakama. Rashi Oimer says it Sheberachai. Maybe karshinin v'taylim. No, you bring regular karshinin, regular animal food, animal veg, and you suspend it for the animal in the bag. Why? Shakarshinin yafas la min akol. Because karshinin is better than all other types of food. And says Rashbi, it's true, you could give the same food, but he says you're even allowed to give a different type of food as long as it's the spitz, as long as it's the ideal food that the animal usually eats. So again, there's no baltach soim, but you have to feed the animal. You can either give, it says the Tanakama, the same food that the animal is working on, or says Rashbi, you can even give it karshinim. So now the Gemara asks a stira. Says the Braisa 6 lines down, Tzadi El Menaliv, Parais Amerchasais Bitvua. Cows that are trampling produce, Einoyoiver, Misham Bal Tachsoim. There's no problem about Tachsoim. Vadashis Bitruma Meiser, Oiver Misham Bal Tachsoim. This Braisa differentiates between working on regular produce versus working on Truma and Meiser. And says the Braisa, if you're working on Truma or Meiser, there is Baldachsim. Why? Vahanachri. Continues the Braisa. Hadosh biparasei shel Yisrael. If a guy is working with the cow of a Yid, then eino ever mishal Baldachsim. And regardless as to whether the guy does or does not muzzle the animal, there's no problem of Baldachsim. So says the Gemara, but the Yisrael adash b'parasa shel nachri over misha baltachse. So obviously the Gemara now does the math for us. Kasha truma truma kasar meiser meiser. There's a stira both in the case of truma and the case of meiser. So explains the Gemara that b'shlama truma like kasha. Why? Because we can make a simple differentiation. Kan bin truma, kan bin gedulei truma. Even though both Brises are talking about truma, we can see that the first Brise that says that there's no bal tachson by truma first to the actual truma, whereas the second Brise that says that there is bal tachson first to Gidulei truma, that which grows from truma. The problem is, ala meiser, kasha. What are we going to do with this stira in meiser? Explains the Gemara. Now, what would one anticipate? That the same tarets you just said for truma, let's say for meiser. Chitim or meiser nami like kasha. Why don't we suggest the exact same thing? Kan b'meiser kan b'gidulei meiser. Let's suggest that one's talking about meiser itself, and one is talking about that which grows from the meiser. So b'shlam gidulei truma. Says the Gemara. When it comes to truma, we understand that which grows from truma, whether it has the status of truma. Excuse me, bishlam gedulei truma. Elek dulei meiser, says the Gemara. That which goes from meiser, chulininu, is regular chulin. It doesn't have any kedusha. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, gedulei tevel, that which grows from tevel, v'gedulei meiser sheni, chulin goes lechulin. So says the Gemara, so how are we can answer up the stira and meiser? Ella loy kasha. Haba meiser risha and haba meiser sheni. That when we said there's an isser about tachsoim, there's an isser to muzzle the animal. That's by meiser risha. Where it says there's no isser, it's going to be by meiser sheni. And the reason being that when it comes to meiser risha, there's no specific kedusha, and therefore, and it just belongs to the Levi, and that's why that could be an isser about tachsoim. However, excuse me, the opposite. One more time. Meiser Rishon belongs to the Levi, and therefore there'll be the regular about tachsoim, whereas Meiser Sheni, there will be no isser about tachsoim because there's no specific kedusha onto it, or because we're talking about Meiser Sheni that's outside Yerushalayim, where of course you're not allowed to eat it at all. Teretz number one, differentiating between Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni. Or I'll tell you they're both Meiser Sheni. V'lo kasha. Harameir. Hareb Yehuda. Says the Gemara, the Brace that says that there is Baltachsaim is Rameir, whereas the second Braisa is Reb Yehuda. Harameir. The Amar. Famously, Meiser Mamun Gavayu. Meiser is Mamun Gavaya, and therefore, there's going to be no Isra Bal Tachsoim. Harav Yehuda, the second Bryce that says that there is an Isra to muzzle the animal, is Rav Yehuda Damar Meiser Sheni Mamun Hadyidhu. Meiser Sheni is Mamun Hadyid, and therefore, it's when you're working with the item, it's considered you're working with your item because it's your mammon. Therefore, there's going to be an isser to muzzle the animal. Who says the Gemara, Hechi Dami? What exactly is this case of the para that is threshing the meiser? Kigain, for example, sheikdimu b'shvilon, a concept that we've seen many times. That when you create it as meiser while it's still in the shvilon, well, it's still in the ears before you fully separate it before the threshing process, and therefore there's still truma that needs to be separated. Still truma needs to be separated. Well, the Rav Yehuda, we're going within the shita of Rav Yehuda. Excuse me. Ask the Gemara 1 second. Rav Yehuda by Chayma. According to Rav Yehuda, you only let eat meiser sheni inside Yerushalayim. So how could we allow the cow to eat meiser sheni outside of Yerushalayim? Says we're talking about a case where they're threshing the produce inside the walls of Beis Pagi. Teretz number 1, 2. First, we differentiate between Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. Rav Yehuda Rameir, Mam Gavoya, Mam Menhedye. Says Gemara, new teretz. We'll differentiate between Meiser Vadei, where is Meiser Demai. Says the Gemara, Meiser Demai, that which belongs to Amaharet, so we'll just separate the Meiser again, the Chumrah. Hasha also Hachi, Truma, Lam, Kasha. So going back, we can see the same teretz by Truma. Kam b'Truma Vadei, Kam b'Truma Demai. But ask the Gemara 1 second. B'Shlama Meiser Demai Ika. Ala Truma Demai Mi Ika. Is there such an entity called Truma of Demai V'Atanya? Afu Bitel Es Avidui. But we learned in a Braisa that Yochanan Kohen Gadol was Mavatel V Doi V'Gazra Al Damayim. He made Xer and Damayim Fi Shalach B'Chol Gvul Yisrael, because he sent out messengers V'Rosh Leim Afrishin that they weren't separating El Truma Gedela B'Lvad. So says the Gemara, when it comes to Truma, we can't say such a thing as Truma Damayim because there's no such thing. Who's a special like Kanan Ma'aser? Eloloi Kasha can't be Truma as Ma'aser Vada, can't be Truma as Ma'aser Demai, and that's how the Gemara concludes how we're going to answer up the stira whether there is an isser of baltachsoim of the para working the different types of produce. So ba'imine meir of sheishes, 20 lines at the bottom. The first one line is meir of sheishes. Haisayecheles umaterezes mau. If the animal is eating and the animal has a little bit of a stomach issue, shtickle diarrhea, what is the halacha? That the question being that the consumption is not beneficial to the animal. It's really hurting the animal. If you look at Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, Rashi says, Matrezes says, Choli me'ayin, Karnas unreal, Metziah rei sol kemayim, Chativ achitin kashin la. That's the critical nikuda, that the wheat is really bad for it. So the animal's not really getting any benefit. So do we say, says the Gemara, do we say that the reason why there's an isser of chasima because the produce is good for the animal, and in this case it's not, so there'll be no issue of muzzling the animal. Maybe the reason is because the animal sees the food, he wants to eat it. And the animal's inside. And over here, even though it's true the animal has a stomach issue, but lemaisa sees the produce and wants to eat it. So Amr Lu Rav Sheishes Tini to bring you a raya. Rashbi Oimesh says Hashem ben Yechai maybe Karshinim Midan La. Why? As we saw Shekarshinim Yavas Lamina Kol. Because Karshinim are good from everything. Shma Mina, Demisham Demali Lo, Shma Mina. So we see clearly from Rashbi, from the fact that he extended that you cannot only give the animal that what it's working on, you can even give the animal Karshinim because Demali Lo. See that the whole reason is because it's supposed to be beneficial for the animals. So Yibayelu continues the Gemara. Can a yid tell a guy, muzzle my animal, and use it to thresh with it? Says the Gemara. Mi amrinon, do we say that ki amrinon amriyah l'nachri shvos? Hani mili, when is there an iser amir lakum? Linyan Shabbos, the iser skila. Avachasim, or iser lavloim, if there's no iser chasima. So ask the Gemara a fundamental shayla in all of amir lakum. We know that when it comes to Shabbos, of course, you're not allowed to ask a guy to do malacha for you. Says the Gemara, is that a din specific to Shabbos, which is very chomer, of course, which is iser skila, or is it even when it comes to regular lavin like chasima? Or perhaps Lishna applies everywhere. So Tashema 7 lines to the bottom. So from here we can be medayik. He's not over. Sounds like, but there should be an isser, which thereby dictate that you're not allowed to tell him to do it. Answers the Gemara, but then the Isur Namilekral is not even an Isser. Right? And he saved the Israel, Dash Baras Shal Nachri. But since the Seva spoke about the case of Israel, that's Dash with the cow of the Nachri, Iver, there's an Isser. Tani Reisha Einoi Iver, but you can't bring your raya from the Mishnah. So Tashema, the Gemara tries again on the last line. The Shalch Le'avu Lishmuel, Shalch the father of Shmuel, Halon Turi. These bulls, these oxen, as we turn over to Tzadi Amid Beis. The ganvin arumai umiganchin yasoin mahu, that the goyim steal and the goyim cause that the animals are unable to have children. They castrate the animals. Mau, what is the halacha? Shalach lahu, and of course the shaila is that we know that siros is aser. So the question is there any problem over here? So Shalach lahu responded, Harama is avid bahu. They do a harama, arimu alayu, biyizdabdun. So do the same thing with them, let them be sold. So what do we see? We see that this is the Rabbanan against telling a guy to do something is even by other aveiros, even over here by siros, which doesn't get the same level of skila like Shabbos. Still, the Isra applies. Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa 3 lines down, Sadim and Beis, B'nei Ma'arava, Savrila, Kid Rav Chika. You can't bring a right from there, because like Rav Chika, Dam B'nei Noach, Matzuvan ala Siros, that Siros crosses over party lines, and it's usher even for a guy. If a cover Misham Levni, V'lo Yisita Mechshal, that's why you're not allowed to let the guy do it, but it's not because we can bring a raya that Amir L'Akum is usher even by non-Shabbos, non-Skila stories. Continues the Gemara 6 lines down. Savai Rava Lameim Krula Shchita. Rava thought that in the case of Siros, they should be sold to be shechted. Amrle Abaya says Abaya Dayon Shekanasta Lehem Mechira. It's enough that you're making a kanasta that you can't sell it, but you don't have to sell it tafka for shchita. So says the Gemara, what is this kanas that we're not allowed to let them sell their animals? Pshita. B'noi gadol ki acher dam. It's pashit. The one's own child who's a gadol is like someone else when you can't sell it, you could sell it to him. B'noi katan mai Ravachi also Ravashi shari. Remember that Shivam lahanu trei chasida mechalfia dadu. That's the mice what they did. They had to exchange one with the other after the goyim that performed the isser with the animal. They were allowed to be swapped one from the other. Therefore, it's not called your animal. Therefore, it's not a problem. Continues the Gemara, 10 lines down. The first one line is law. Back to our original Shayla. Bayi Rami Bar Chamba. What is the status with Haishav Lakaitz V'Piyah Ma'u? So we spoke about the muzzling, Baltachsoim. So it says Rami Bar Chamba, what if you put a thorn in the animal's mouth so that it's not able to eat? Is that nichlal? Is that included in the classical chasima? So he responded, understand, it's a regular chasima. Who cares if you tape its mouth shut, you put something inside? Lamaisa, the animal can't eat. So he responded, Elo yashav la kaitz b'piyah mahu. What happened if it happened on its own? You didn't put it in the kites went in on its own. Do we say, or mahu? What if you put a lion near the threshing area, so the animal's scared from eating? What's the halacha? Says the Gemara, what do you mean? If you put a lion there, it's mamish chasima. So says, because you stop the animal from eating, says Gemara, you're right. But what if there happens to be a lion outside Mahu, you didn't put it there? Another shayla. What if someone put the calf of the animal outside, which will make it that doesn't want to eat the food? I said, what if the animal really needs a drink? What if you spread a boiled hide on top of the produce that it shouldn't eat? So says the Gemara, all these shayla pashat mi'achad, I'll answer one of them. The Tanya, Rashai bal para lahara parasai kidei sheteichal min hadisha harbe. One is allowed to starve his animals, so he'll eat a lot from the produce that it's being threshed. For Rashai bal abayis lahatir pekia amir lefnei behema. Bal abayis is allowed to put a bunch of hay in front of the animal kidei sheteichal min hadisha harbe, so it does not eat a lot. So what do we see? We see that spreading over hay over the stuff that the animal's threshing is the same thing as well. One of the last case, which was what? Which was paras la katavla, spreading over a hide over the food. The chayr, it's the same thing that you're allowed to do. It says we're no raya shiny asam to ka'achla. By the hay, it's eating the hay, so you can't bring a raya from there to Nesar Ar Clays, which is just blocking the produce from being eaten. Ibay same another territory. The Brisa means that you're allowed to untie hay in front of the animal or in the beginning, so it doesn't need a knot. But you're not necessarily putting there to block. If it was there originally, then you'd be allowed to leave it there, so we do not have a raya. Continues the Gemara, about 20 lines to the end of the Amen, min adisha, the first words, ba'i minei, Rav Yoini said, Merav Simai, another shayla, chasma mi bachotz mahu. What is the status? If the owner muzzles it outside, meaning before you get to the threshing, then you leave the animal into thresh. Do we say shar bedisha emer achmana of Allah bedisha? You weren't machsim, you didn't put on the muzzle while it was threshing, so maybe it's allowed. The Torah says you should not work the animal while it is muzzled. Amar le, he responded, he said, from your father's house we can learn, says the pasuk, that you and your son should not drink Aaron Akayin wine when you enter Bivayacham. Bivayacham Udaser, Hamishte Umayel Shari. It's only while you're walking in, but to drink outside and then go in his mother. Well, Havdal ben HaKadosh ben HaCholam Rachman Elamahos and Bishaz Bia Lotei Shechros. Then what do we learn out there? As you're going in, of course, you can't be drunk. So too says the Braisa Bishaz Di Shalotei Chasima. That's going to be a raya that there is a chasima is not only going to be b'shas ma'isa, even to set up situation prior. We conclude Tanu Rabbanan Achaisim is apara. If someone lamaisa is over this and he muzzles the animal mazavig b'kilayim, or he meets animals that are kilayim, pater ve'inoi loike, you don't get malchus. Ella diyesh ela dayesh umanig balvad. That's the only case that not only is it asr, but also will be malchus. Pick it up from here, b'siyata dishmaya.